One of the things that I think the outside world doesn't yet understand enough about the atrocities of the 7th of October is the fact that some of the first victims were exactly the sort of people who were most pro-Palestinian, pro-Gazan, believed in the idea of living side by side, helped them out. These poor families who believed in peace and living together, who were hiring Palestinian workers to give them employment. And you remember, just before, there was another negotiation about more Palestinians coming through the Eretz crossing in order for more people to be working inside Israel. That is gone, dead. I really do think that although some lessons have been learned very fast inside this country, outside, I do fear that people are going to be dreaming defunct dreams and trying to integrate totally dead delusions. And if I had one message for the outside world, if we don't do that, no idea how preposterous that sounds now.
I just came back from the interview with Mr. Douglas Murray, and let me tell you, it was a blast. Douglas Murray needs no introduction. Nevertheless, he is a best-selling author of many books, including The Strange Death of Europe, The Madness of Crowds, and most recently, The War on the West. He is one of the leading conservative thinkers of our time, and for me, above all, he is a true friend and defender of Israel. I was very excited throughout this interview and even a little bit nervous. Without further ado, let's watch together Douglas Murray. I want to start with a question that I find very interesting, and the question is, why you? You are a very unlikely defender of Israel, and you are the biggest defender of Judeo-Christian values, and you're not Jewish, you're secular, and the elite, the British elite, are anti-Israel and secular. So how come that you are such a big defender of Israel?
First of all, I don't know that it's true that, well, first of all, I don't know what I'm sure I belong to an elite of some kind. Everyone belongs to some kind of elite, and everyone is also anti-elitist. So we have to live with this. I don't accept that the elites in Britain are inevitably anti-Israel. I think there are some. The Labour Party, for instance, is pretty anti-Israel, although its current leader is doing quite well so far, mainly because his predecessor was an anti-Semite who brought the party into great disrepute. I think our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has done pretty reliably in this conflict so far in holding the line of civilized values against barbarianism. I'm sort of surprised and saddened, if it is the case that it's surprising that somebody from Britain would be friendly towards Israel. But I can see how you might think that, because of course the vision from outside Britain is that, we have these terrible, huge anti-Israel marches that make a lot of noise. Although this past weekend we had a march of over 100,000 people in solidarity with the Jewish community in the UK. So it's not all bad news, myself, I suppose, I've always had a deep instinct about this country and its people, deep appreciation for it. I don't take it for granted, and that's partly because I've traveled a lot in my life and I've seen a lot, and so I know how precarious civilization is, and I therefore am protective of countries and societies that seek to defend civilization, and particularly when it's under threat, and it's under considerable threat, very proximate threat in the country we're sitting in now.
It seems to me that there is something beyond, protecting the civilization. I heard your speech at the London synagogue. And it seems to me that there is like a deeper connection over there. You said to John Anderson that the Jewish people are the canary in the coal mine. So
well, that's certainly true, yes.
It might be, it's not just, a fight for civilization. It may be something a little bit different or stronger.
I think it is something stronger, something deeper, certainly. it's very hard to analyze your own motives, your own instincts. I just know that my own instincts have always been on the side of Israel against those who would wish to destroy it, and I suppose, or attack it, or even sort of lambast it. And that's because I do think that this country is a sort of miracle, you know. In a single lifespan, a person could have had a lifespan from the moment that Herzl wrote Jewish State to Israel having Jerusalem in one lifetime. And that seems, among other things, a sign of the possibility of hope over defeat, of life over death, of civilization over its enemies, but also more than that. I think that it is I don't like the term philo-Semite because it has too many connotations of simply being the same thing as anti-Semites, but they think it's good, you know. So I don't see myself as a philo-Semite particularly, but I have a deep admiration for this country and I think deep understanding of the people who are its enemies. And a lot of people where I'm from are kind of glib about that, or just don't understand the dangers this country has faced time and again, and that the Jewish people have faced time and again. And so yes, I mean, but you're right. It's something that comes from here as well as here.
Let me offer an alternative explanation that might also explain, and it's sort of a mystical explanation. And again, I heard your first lecture in Israel in the conservative conference.
It wasn't my first lecture in Israel.
One of your
No, I spoke here first about almost 20 years ago.
Okay, yes. So the first lecture that I attended, and you say about I'm an atheist. This is what you said then. But I need to act as if I believe in God.
Well, I'm an agnostic. I was a Christian agnostic, and yes, I follow the advice that Pope Benedict gave when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger. Yes, to behave as though God exists, even if you sometimes doubt it. But that seems to me a pretty good halfway house.
And my theory is that the origin of the modern state of Israel is a biblical event. Even if you don't believe in anything, in a biblical event happening in the middle of the 20th century, which brings back the tiny possibility that maybe other biblical events can be relevant. Maybe the Bible is still relevant in modern time. And some of the rage that the secular intellectual people in Europe and other parts of the world say that we want to resist the idea of biblical events in the 20th century.
That's possible. I mean, I do see the founding of the State of Israel as a sort of miracle, more so because it was so nearly snuffed out at the very beginning. I mean, I was going around a new museum that's going to open some point soon here in Israel, just earlier today. And I mean, I think so few people outside this country realize how close it was in 1948. Imagine being people who lived through what those people had lived through, and then again, you have to fight to the death against people trying to destroy you. And it's unbelievable. So maybe, yes, maybe I'm open to the belief in miracles.
I think it was Ben-Gurion who said that in Israel, in order to be rational, you have to believe in miracles.
Yes,
I think
that's right.
It's a good quote. Okay, let's move on to another thing, the relationship between Israel and Europe. What is Israel, according to your opinion? What is Israel doing right and what Europe do wrong? And why do you think Europe should learn from Israel and not vice versa? Because most of the elite intellectual, both in Israel and in Europe, think that we should learn more from Europe. The English version of Haaretz basically praise Angela Merkel, Barack Obama, and diminish all the native values, all the native Jewish values in Israel?
Well, I think it was Bob Kagan who said some years ago, that Europe believes it lives after history, it believes it's beyond wars, beyond conflict, beyond statehood even, beyond it's forgotten the essential tragedy of human existence, believes that it's got past it. And Israel doesn't have that amazing, what can you say it, delusion to live. We got an interruption off camera.
This is when your tech person.
That's when your tech person has, yeah, exactly. But thank you. You're very well. Israel doesn't have the opportunity to live in that delusion. So if you're a 21-year-old man or woman in the UK, you can believe that what matters most is your Instagram page, the way in which you present yourselves to your friends and others, the desire to get money, accrue some capital if you can, get on the housing ladder, and also that your society sort of owes you, and that if things are unfair, they should be addressed by the society, and that we can wage war on unfairness. And that's why you hear Europeans saying things like, we must tackle hate. Oh, really? What are you going to do after you've defeated hate? Are you going to go on to sloth or gluttony or no chance of that? But it's this. I think a happy delusion, and Israelis at 20 and 21 are currently
in Gaza Strip.
In the Gaza Strip, it's so. I just wish that Europeans learn from Israel on these things. Is that when things are close to the boat, like you do have to hit them back, and Europeans, like Americans, believe that it's sort of always going to go on like this. And I've never had that delusion. I don't especially know why I haven't, but I just don't think I ever had that delusion, or if I did, I had it for a matter of minutes as a child. But Israel lives in history. And Europeans, to a great extent, can't forgive Israel for that, because it then sees the country that lives in history as causing everyone else to have to live in history, or at risk of doing so. And that's a very a problem for Israel. It gets blamed by Europeans for having conflicts, for instance, for defending itself. May Europeans live in this luxury belief forever, but I suspect they won't.
By the way, I think what you just said is some of the reasons why we don't see many Israelis believing UFOs, because we don't need to invent enemies outside Earth's enemies. We have enough enemies just around. And
more than enough.
Yeah, more than enough. I would like to ask you something about, things that you wrote in The Strange Death of Europe. The idea is that after World War II, we are not going to extend our fight to morality, to good versus evil, because if I go with my beliefs all the way, then I will become Nazi Germany. And, the relativism in your morality is something that is just against everything that Israel stands for. I think that the Jewish concept of morality is that sometimes power can be moral.
Yes,
even more moral than love. And I think that this is a very clear distinction. But Europe Britain, Great Britain, we had Churchill versus Chamberlain. Churchill believes that he fought pure evil. So how come Britain became Chamberlain again?
I'm not sure if it's Chamberlain again. I just think that the history of the 20th century in Europe, as I say in The Strange Death of Europe, the Hebrew edition I see is on the table, is that, thank you very much, show it for the camera. What I say there is that Europe almost destroyed itself and the world twice in one century, and that would weigh on anyone. And, there's also that thing of, come on, we can't have to do this again, can we? And a lot of people felt that after the First World War. I mean, one of the reasons why there's a sort of slightly unfair rap given sometimes to some of the appeasers in the 30s and so on is that, there was and it was understandable that a generation that had gone through the trenches of World War I, or who lost their fathers in World War I, or saw a whole generation come back irreparably damaged in mind, body, and spirit, might want to avoid this ever happening again. And remember, the First World War, then known as the Great War, was meant to be the war to end all wars. And the idea, you have to do it again so soon, is something which of course people wanted to resist that as an idea. And I don't doubt that Israelis have the same thing. Again, we've got to do this. But yes, alas, it's not a choice.
Another thing that I think it differentiates the Jewish culture from both Islamic culture and Christian culture, the idea of asking questions, the idea of free speech that is inherently in the culture. We don't ask questions in Christianity. We are not allowed to ask questions in Islam. And maybe this is one of the things that, that is profoundly different in Israel versus you today, because
I don't know. I think Christian culture certainly asks questions. I agree that Islamic culture,
yes,
the nature of Islamic culture is submission to Allah. So, I mean, of course that's, and inshallah, which is, of course, the soporific idea ever, which is whatever is effectively. But I mean, I don't agree that there's a sort of theological explanation for it particularly, because I do see Israeli culture and European cultures, Western cultures, as being very similar, but at different speeds, you might say. Similar societies traveling at different speeds, and European society wants to continue to drive below the speed limit, and Israeli society doesn't have that option.
Okay, and what can we do? What can we do in order to help the European society, to push the...
I mean, I don't know if it's Israel's job to do that. Israel's job is to look after Israel. The Israeli government's job is to look after the Israeli people.
But it's part of your job as the most prominent conservative journalist in the UK.
Well, I see my job as simply telling the truth as I see it, and writing about what I see, and being as accurate in my analysis as possible. I would love Europeans to be more aware of the fact that what they're living in is a kind of holiday from reality, but it's more likely that events will wake them up to that fact than my writing, sad to say. I wrote The Strange Death of Europe 7 years ago now, came out 6 years ago. And since all my warnings, as far as I can see, with the exception of a small number of countries in Europe, everyone else put their foot on the accelerator of things like immigration, mass immigration, illegal immigration. Instead of strengthening their borders, they weakened them even more. Instead of strengthening their civil societies, they made them even weaker. And but that, as I've always said, will differ country by country. And some countries might be in a position to save themselves from becoming completely relativistic, and others will not.
Let's move on to the idea again, to the canary in the coal mine. And again, the canary and the people in the coal mine share one specific thing, which is oxygen. And in this analogy, the Jews being the canary in the coal mine are the Judeo-Christian values?
Yes, but also all the things that come from that most people think are like oxygen. I mean, it is the case, I'm afraid, that modern Western man does regard things like rights as being as a fish believes water is. Of course I'm surrounded by this. If my rights are affected or trampled on, I'll demand more rights. That's the idea that, it seems to me that one of the central insights of conservatism in its true sense, and small c conservative sense, is the simple knowledge that everything can go wrong, everything can be different. Everything you love can be trampled upon. And without any necessary divine or other intervention, imagine what it was like for Catholics in the 16th century to see their monasteries despoiled. They probably thought God would strike down their enemies at some point, and he didn't. And it's very important for people, in my mind, to realize that the line between civilization and barbarism, between a society in which your rights are protected and which you can even moan about rights and anyone even cares, and a society in which people can just go around chopping people's heads off, is
very thin.
It's much thinner than people like to think, and they should think about that more, because if they did, they'd be more. They'd have more gratitude towards their societies, which, as I say in my most recent book, The War on the West, is that we live in societies in the West of resentment, resentfulness, of forever saying what's not given to us, what we don't have, and demanding that somebody give it to us. And in actual fact, I'd like to see our societies transforming more into societies of gratitude. Actually, what we have is pretty darn wonderful. It's pretty amazing. And at the very least, it's a pretty good thing to build on. Or at least don't pass it on worse. These are very basic presumptions and assumptions for society. But yes, I think they come from, to put the other side of it, there are plenty of people, you meet grown-ups who think that the world is just meant to get better and better. You meet them all the time. They're actually walking, talking beings. I don't understand how you can leave the house in the morning being so ignorant. It's self-evident that society can get better in certain ways and then can completely burn itself down. My friends who were in Iran in the 60s and 70s, 50s even, did not imagine that the world they knew would fall apart completely.
And very rapidly.
Very rapidly.
Very. By the way, in Jewish culture, we don't speak about rights, we speak about obligations, which is an entire, profoundly different way to treat reality.
Yes.
This is not you have no rights, you have only obligations.
Well, the way that used to be framed was that rights come with responsibilities, but we dropped the responsibilities bit.
I hear you talking, and I have Neil Ferguson on my mind that, the West has done so many beautiful and good things to humanity, and this is one thing that we need to cherish. And it seems that in the battle of ideas, what in your perspective, like one or two of the most valuable things that we need to cherish from the Western culture and fight for them?
Well, you need
free speech will be one of
free speech is one of them, obviously. But these are all instruments down the line from the original thing, which is you need to know where you came from. And if Westerners forget where they came from, then, all you're doing is sawing off the branch of a tree that you're sitting on. And so that's the first thing. Education in most Western countries, particularly in America, I have to say, is so appalling these days that very few people know anything. it seems to me, even about the founding of their own country. Basic historical literacy is unbelievably poor. The only thing anyone knows about history is the Nazis, and they know that Hitler was bad, and therefore don't be Hitler. But unfortunately, even that is not a strong enough it's not a strong enough moral lesson. So German leftists of the 50s who knew as one thing, don't do what our parents did, and who ended up joining up with the PLO and sifting out Jews on hijacked planes. I would suggest that the people today marching through the streets believing they're being not Hitler, if they got their dream of, or what they shout and scream about from the river to the sea, the river being a river that they couldn't name and the sea being one they couldn't point to on a map. But nevertheless, if they got their wish, they would have the Judenrhein land, which Hamas and Fatah, the PA, want to be clear of Jews, and therefore, in the name of being anti-Hitler, they would fulfill Hitler's dream.
There is a book called The Dumbest Generation, and in this book,
good title.
It presents Don't Trust Anyone Below 30. This is the second title. And in this...
It's slightly unfair because there are lots of smart people I know, but you have to have thought your way through it, is the point.
No. You
have to have thought your way through it.
It was a slogan against don't trust anyone above 40.
Yeah. Well, the boomers.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, he showed the poll that most U.S. youngsters think that the U.S. was fighting Russia in World War II, because now they are not friends, so it probably went back. But when you say we need to know where we came from, God. Is it only, before it was worse than it is now, but in a secular materialistic frame of education or ideology or society, it is very hard to defend values such as free speech and such as the goal to your ability to pursue your goals, etc., because those things are coming or stems from some transcendental values.
Well, I mean, yes, I don't particularly care for the summing up of a society like Britain, where I was born. I don't particularly care for the summing up of it as being about free speech and rights. Like, that's a component, but that's not the point of Britain. The point of Britain is a whole slew of things. And British culture is very different even from the nearest culture in, say, the Netherlands or France. But every culture, and this is a big problem always for conservatives, is that leftists tend to always demand the same things everywhere they are, whereas conservatives are always conserving something different everywhere they are. But in the UK, in Britain, for instance, we're conserving, I'd like us to conserve, a very specific culture, which is reflected in the institutions, the great institutions of the country, but also in its music, in its culture, in its literature, in its art, in its religion, in its rather peculiar religious inheritance. But then who doesn't have a peculiar religious inheritance? But I would like to see that preserved. So when we had a sort of breakdown in the last 20 years in the UK of mainly very second-rate thinkers saying things like, who are we? What are we? And they always came away with these attempts, they were wearing intellectual mittens, they couldn't grasp at anything. Very superficial things like, being British is about, fair play or something. As I've often pointed out, even the Saudis don't say that they believe in unfair play. So it was very superficial. And really, in part, that's inevitable, because if you were to say to an individual, explain to me in totality who you are, it's difficult. Yes. It would be difficult. And if you kept asking the person for a long time, you could drive them to a breakdown. I think it's the same with societies. It's rather difficult, actually, to say what exactly it is, for instance, that divides or that differentiates Swedish culture from Norwegian culture. An outsider might think that any such differences are impossible to determine, but they're there.
Swedish, Norwegian, it looks the same to me. At this part of the interview, I was so excited that I forgot to ask you, please subscribe to the channel and support us on Patreon. You will also notice that in the following 10 minutes, there is a slight technical audio problem. Had we received more support on Patreon, this would probably have never happened. Nevertheless, with a slight technical problem in the audio, let's hear what Douglas Murray has to say regarding the real question about self-definition.
And so this whole thing of sort of who are we, what are we, in part is sort of the wrong question. The question should be, how do we continue to be what we are that's good? And what are your metrics for being good? Yes. What are your objective metrics, which sometimes are very hard to determine? Well, one would be if you're a force for good in the world. And one of the reasons why Britain had lost a certain amount of self-confidence in recent years, and British public have, is because it's been hammered out of by malevolent actors who tell them they've never done anything good as a country. Fortunately, there are enough sensible people who are not in the sort of elites who still hold on to the true belief that we've broadly been a force for good in the world. Then it's the same with America. I mean, America in the last generation has had its sense of itself beaten out of itself. Same thing with Australia. I was speaking with an Australian friend yesterday who was saying that in our own lifetimes, the happy country has been transformed into the unhappy country. The country where the sort of, no nonsense has been turned into a country of complete nonsense, where people are forever being told to apologize for things they have nothing to do with.
Among some other things, Stephen Hicks, in explaining postmodernism, I think, nails it down. Ever since the Renaissance, the focus was the individual, but in order to pursue happiness, the focal point must be outside yourself. And it is very hard in a materialistic world.
Yes, because the pursuit of happiness in purely materialistic terms is how much stuff can I get, which of course is...
By the way, Aristotle, when he discussed happiness, he didn't mean it in the same way that we mean it today. How do you fulfill your role as a human being the same way this cup fulfills its role as a cup?
Well, one thing is, of course, is to have an idea in your mind as an individual of what the life is, would like to live, that would make it meaningful, that meant that when you were dying, you didn't feel like wasted your time. Which isn't to say that everyone, nobody has regrets, but I mean, at least, you would feel that you or know that you'd lived the life you were meant to live. For you to be able to do that, you have to have a concept of a life well lived.
Because it suggests that some ways are good and some ways are not good.
Well, that's also one of my objections to the claim. I mean, I'm written a lot about free speech and on the war of the Free Speech Union in the UK, and we're proud of. It's a great free speech population, but I don't see free speech as being a pursuit in itself. I mean, the point of free speech is not to just have free speech, but to do something. And the doing something with it, in my mind, is like freedom of writing or freedom of publishing, is to pursue truth. What's the point of that? It's because if you believe in that truth exists in the world, then it's something you should try to get to. Why shouldn't you try to get to it? In order to get to the purpose of things, the essence of things, the echt of things. That's the point.
I think this was, the biggest reason why you were so pissed off with Norman Finkelstein. The idea that people denied what happened in Beirut, the massacre at the Re'im party, at the Nova Festival. I came to pursue the truth. I was at the Shura hospital and I saw everything. And then you say people don't want to hear, don't want to absorb the truth for unethical reasons.
Yes, I mean, I was upset to hear what Finkelstein had to say, partly because I thought that he was gone. I mean, his career was so destroyed when it's 20 years ago that watching his vague return is like watching an act of necromancy. It's extraordinary to view. And yes, I mean, here's a man who wrote on the 7th of October, so this glorious day that has been written in the stars, and claimed that the citizens of Gaza had broken out of a concentration camp. And firstly, of course, anyone who did manage to break out of concentration camps in the 40s did not immediately go next door and behead as many babies as they could. You'll notice.
And now we have the one hostage that ran away from his captive in Gaza and walked away 4 days in Gaza Strip. And then innocent Palestinian civilians returned him to the Hamas. And this was just published today.
I mean, it's heartbreaking. But to see the lies in real time is very frustrating. You'll remember that, I mean, one of the reasons why the American journalists gave the order, was it Truman that gave the order to take video footage of the concentration camps, was the knowledge that he said there will come a day when they say this didn't happen. So,
and this day came much faster than we would ever expect.
This day happened in hours. I mean, look at all these perverts online going on about things like, well, there weren't 40 babies decapitated. Most of them still had their heads on, or were not entirely hacked off. And you think, really, that's where you want to argue? But there's a reason for that, of course, which is that the people who would do that, Finkelstein-like people, find the mass murder of Jews on October the 7th to be an encumbrance to their political goals, their political and moral goals, which is, for instance, to eradicate the state of Israel. And they find some of what Hamas did a bit much, but they want to get past it as soon as possible, get around it. It's the same thing, by the way, that, I mean, there are bits of the far right in Europe still which play these dirty, ugly, dangerous games of trying to, you see it in vitiate elements in French politics, so trying to get around the collaboration. Why? Because they can't face having to walk straight through it and accept it.
Because they're afraid of a second Charlie Hebdo, I think.
No, I mean, that's not the cause of the vitiate thing. I mean, the second Charlie Hebdo fear is simply from insulting Islam. But no, I mean, I'm talking about a thing of trying to do the morally cowardly thing of going around the atrocity because you desire to get to the other side of the atrocity. That's what these people are trying to do with October 7th. They must sense that something happened which is not entirely great, and they would like to get around it in order to get to the same goal. Well, no.
I published a YouTube video about ChatGPT as being pro-Hamas, and the idea was that ChatGPT was programmed to be politically correct, but sometimes when reality itself is not politically correct, it doesn't have the tools to handle such a non-politically correct reality. So ChatGPT, because it was programmed to be politically correct, we do exactly what you said.
And you've done that with it.
Yes. And I showed, I said, listen, but there was a massacre. And I show my conversation with ChatGPT. When you are trained to be politically correct, you can't handle realities which are way not politically correct.
Yes, well, if you have a pre-programmed belief, by the way, there's this, without getting into the critique of Pinkerism, seeing Pinkerism is, of course, is that it, like Foucaultism, is that it all works, but for the two biggest footnote corrections of all time, which is World War I, World War II. the idea that we're getting better as a species.
Enlightenment now, besides those 2 points.
Except the two most catastrophic events.
What happened between, in Germany, between 39 and 45, I'm going to ignore.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it was fabrics.
By the way, I've had David Berlinski has made this point, great mathematician.
Yeah, I wanted to come to meet him in person.
He's great, you should do.
Yeah.
He's an amazing mind. It is, David, you pointed out that the Pinker and Co. I mean, it seemed like a remarkable man. I'm not by any means dismissing all his work. I wouldn't dare. But this particular issue, for instance, of the decline of murder as being the decline of murder as being a measurement of human improvement. The statistics only work if you take out mass murder. But that would be like, for instance, that would be like only counting road deaths that are lower than 2.
Okay, I think you made your point.
Yeah.
In Members of Court, I think that this is a great name of the book.
In my best-selling book, The Madness of Abraham. I can't remember the title in Hebrew, but yeah, it's very close to it.
Yes, I have the Kindle version. So it says, it seems to me that both the feminism movement and the climate movement,
it was never about that. When you hear Greta say that she's pro-Hamas, okay? Mm-hmm. When you hear that the feminist movement in Europe are ignoring Israeli girls being raped by Hamas, it was never about feminism. It was never about.
Well, I would refine that thought if I could, just slightly, which is to say, it started as being about that. For some people, I mean, the feminist movement for some people was, and it had lots to be said for it in its first and perhaps second wave.
The third wave was never about that.
The third wave was never about that. That was about revolutionaries. And there's always an element in all of these social movements that wish to improve something. And I think the feminist movement did do a great deal of good. But there was always an element within it that wanted to, for instance, go past equal rights onto misandry, man-hating. There were always parts of the feminist movement who wanted to hate men. That's why occasionally there's always an article or a new book. There was one by a French young female author a few years ago about, why we can do without men. There's a sort of every few years that always comes around. And of course, it's a ridiculous argument. And actually, it's not about, as I say, it's not about feminism. It's about man-hating. And my own view, esoteric as it may be, is that I think that the sexes should be able to get on. But anyway, it's the same thing with the Green Movement. I mean, there is a lot to be said for caring about the environment and not destroying the planet. Absolutely. But there's some inevitability that in second wave greenism, it's about revolutionaryism. And you can now, I mean, it's sad when people are completely predictable, but you can predict with 100% accuracy that somebody like Greta Thunberg was going to end up being a sort of anti-Israel activist. You can absolutely pro-Palestinian. What the hell does she know about the Middle East? Oh, come on, she never even went to school.
There was this riot, and one protester said, I wanted to be in a conference about climate, not about Hamas. And he was kicked out from the stage because basically this was about the resentment, the anti-West.
Yes, of course. I don't know enough about Japanese culture. I'd like to know a lot more, but there's obviously a very rich tradition. But I understand from a friend who does know a lot about Japanese culture, that there was in the sort of pre-modern era in Japan, when somebody was we would have said in the Middle Ages, the liege lord of somebody. If you had sworn your allegiance to a military or other, leader, and that leader was killed, you would stagger around the land looking for another person to attach yourself to. I would submit that people like Greta Thunberg, various climate activists, various Palestinian activists in the West.
Judith Butler.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thinker and writer of modern times against really stiff competition. People like that are hopelessly hollowed out individuals. They had sometimes a bit of a belief, and then they just roam the land like empty souls looking for another person to put their allegiance onto. And there are some ready-made allegiances. You can join our fight to attack the climate emergency. Whenever there's not another emergency, it's the climate emergency. Fight to stop the climate emergency, the climate crisis. Don't you agree we're in a climate crisis? And when that's cooled down a bit, they stagger around the land. Free Palestine. If Free Palestine wasn't the thing, as I wrote recently, it would be 20 years ago, it would be free to bed. So you can, these are lost souls looking for meaning. And in a way, one should pity them, except that they're so incredibly unpleasant.
Yes.
And the effects of their stupidity are so appalling.
But again, those leaders are always against West.
Yes. Well, that's the underlying thing. I mean, you mentioned Nietzsche's work on resentment and the genealogy of morals. And of course, as I often say, Nietzsche in general, but that book in particular has to be approached very carefully, because of course it's also an anti-Christian text, of course, because of Nietzsche's special problems with Christianity, which he believed had introduced a sort of form of victimhood, of course. And I think he's a very stimulating, like all of Nietzsche's, a very stimulating critique, and I don't entirely agree with it. But on resentment, he was one of the great thinkers and
prophets.
A prophet, really, yes. He did have. I mean, he was. I was reading Ecce Homo recently, his last book before he goes into madness, and I mean it is. I read it first 25 years ago, and I had no idea what it was about. And this time I was like, oh, I see. It's a terrifying work. I mean, terrifying not least in its simple, unbelievable searingness. One reason why I think the Palestinian issue has become a focal point for people of resentment is that it gives them a purpose to search for cosmic justice through a misunderstanding of what's been happening in this region for the last 80 years and a lot before. And if you are told that a genocide is going on, that an ethnic cleansing, a Holocaust is going on, a prison camp is going on, this is the biggest. Again, they don't notice the Pakistanis currently moving 2 million people forcibly out of Pakistan. Nobody cares. There are no cameras there. Nobody's videoing it. They don't care about Yemen. They don't care about Syria. They don't care about any of this. They don't care about Muslim lives per se. They mind about Israel defending itself. They mind about the Jewish state defending itself. And there are many. I mean, there's too many other psychological factors to go into in full, but there are many other factors. I mean, for instance, if you're a European and you have some hereditary guilt for the Holocaust in whichever country you're in, you can make yourself feel a bit better by saying the Israelis are currently doing the same thing as the Nazis, which therefore means that the Europeans weren't so bad. And there's a lot at play there. Yeah. I mean, and also, of course, don't forget that key one of the opportunity to hurt Jews, which it seems to me is what's going on, the very language that is chosen. Why do they say that Gaza is like the Warsaw Ghetto? I mean, there are so many things you could compare Gaza to in history. But why say the Warsaw Ghetto? Because you want to offend Jews, you want to upset Jews, you want to wound Jews, you want to hurt them. And so I think most of this is a knowing or unknowing effort to taunt Jews.
In your opinion, and I heard your theory about, the comparison to the ghetto Warsaw, the Warsaw ghetto. The idea is, but why do they want to insult Jews? Why is it? And maybe because Jew represent something that is, the complete opposite of resentment.
Yes, and I think there's something.
Why the Jews?
I think that's very something.
By Dennis Prager. Why the Jews? Okay, and the idea. What do we, as the Jewish people, represent that correlates with the West? That the resentment movement is so anti.
Well, I suppose some people can never quite console themselves to the fact that the Jewish people live.
After we killed Christ?
Maybe for some people, that's part of it. I think more, there are more proximate issues these days. But I think that, certainly within the Arab and Muslim world, there is, as I've mentioned a number of times recently, there is, and Bernard Lewis among others, made this point, but there is this, Muslim hatred of Jews that comes from the religion, and it comes from the religion in part because, if you are the people who've been given the allegedly last revelation from God, then why are things going so badly for you? Why is the GDP of most Muslim countries so terrible unless they happen to strike oil, and even then it just goes to the top 1%. And why, when the Jews have this one slither of land which doesn't have any oil, do they make such a success of it? And so there are lots of causes of resentment within the Arab and Muslim mind. I find, however, the sort of Western latching on to that to be very sinister and sad development. But to finish on a positive note, there's no reason why it's inevitable. Much outside opinion on Israel changed in 1967 and 1973 when the Jews started winning. But plenty of leftists were on board the whole way with Israel. All the people who visited kibbutzes and came and worked for 6 months on kibbutz in the 50s and 60s. That whole movement was largely leftist. And that movement sort of ebbed away because Israel was winning. And when its neighbors tried to wipe it out, managed to stop them doing so. It's at the Deborah Horn point, among others. It's okay as long as the Jews are losing, or if they're dead. But the moment that they're winning, the moment they're successful, this is intolerable. But that can be turned around. I honestly do believe since it's gone so polluted in our lifetimes, we can unpollute it in our lifetimes as well.
After 4 weeks in Israel, do you feel optimistic or more optimistic?
I feel immensely optimistic about this country.
And about this war?
The war is another question. We'll see what happens. But I'm very optimistic about this country because having gone through one of the most divided periods, I think, in Israeli history in the last year, you were attacked in the most bloody way, and the country has come together, and you can feel it everywhere. If I go to visit bases, if I just speak to soldiers on the street, if I go to interview people, the sense of coming together, of this disparate,
of this external enemy, unifies you as a Jew. I think, the concept of you were murdered because you were a Jew, this horrible telephone. Yes, Dad, they killed 10 Jews, yeah? The idea that the concept of Judaism, you are not Israeli, you are not part of the world. Gadi Taub, which is a mutual friend. Yes, wrote, about, the people of the big world. You are not a people of the big world, even though that you have like a foreign passport. It doesn't matter. They will see you always as a Jew. And this, I think, many people say, okay, it is real. All the stories that I heard about the Holocaust, they actually see me as different because I'm Jewish. And there is nothing I can do about it to change.
Well, of course. One of the things that I think the outside world doesn't yet understand enough about the atrocities of the 7th of October is the fact that some of the first victims were exactly the sort of people who were most pro-Palestinian, pro-Gazan, believed in the idea of living side by side, helped them out. what the long-term consequences are for those people, those communities who were butchered, knowing that, for instance, not just, the women who drove Palestinian children to hospital appointments and then were burned alive by Hamas, but the knowledge that, the kibbutz that...
If he's in war, was treated in Israel. He has something in his brain,
Yes.
and he was treated, I think, 3 times in Israel.
Yes, I wish one of those operations had gone wrong. But yes, and just take that other one. The thing we now know that that many of the Hamas attackers, terrorists of the 7th, their bodies, alive or dead, were found with maps of the kibbutz and with exactly which house was which house. What does that mean? It means that these poor families who believed in peace and living together, who were hiring Palestinian workers to give them employment. And you remember, just before, there was another negotiation about more Palestinians coming through the Eretz crossing in order for more people to be working inside Israel. That is gone, dead, when we discovered, and the Israelis discovered, that these people had acted as spies and given the information to Hamas so that they knew exactly who was in which house and how many people they could kill. The idea, that's one of the things I want the outside world to realize, because everyone in Israel realizes it. That dream has died. And very few people, I think, in this country can possibly believe in that dream at the moment. And when the outside world looks in and says things like, that's why you've got to double down on the two-state solution, you just have to say, I'm sorry, this is like you telling me, we've got to go back to Roman law and not build on it at all. All of that is gone. And not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, it seems to me. The fact that the Palestinian Authority celebrated the massacres, the fact that just a couple of days ago they were lynching other Palestinians.
The civilians. I think, the big mistake that some Israelis are still making is a distinction between Hamas and Fatah and the innocent civilians. I think, the idea of, and there was a poll coming out recently 2 days ago about how many people in Gaza think what happened in October 7 was good. Mm-hmm. Now,
it's tricky to poll in Gaza.
It's diminishing because Gaza is doing. Nevertheless, most of Gazan civilians in October 7 were very happy. Extremely happy.
Yeah, we've got they're letting off fireworks in the West Bank as well.
Definitely.
And
the Prime Minister in the West Bank say, "Wow, this is a great stuff."
Yes, so that's meant to be the partner for peace. Like, I don't think so. But yes, I said to somebody from the Red Cross, I was on a television program with the other day, she was talking about Gaza and the innocent civilians of Gaza versus the Hamas. And I said, well, what about Hamas civilians? What about the people who voted in Hamas? What about the people who collaborated with them all these years? This isn't to call for collective punishment, to just point out it's that I really do think that although some lessons have been learned very fast inside this country, outside, I do fear that people are going to be dreaming defunct dreams and trying to integrate totally dead delusions. And if I had one message for the outside world, if we don't do that, no idea how preposterous that sounds now.
There is a great paradox, a very interesting paradox, that if a Muslim country wants to be liberal, it must be totalitarian. Because if there will be one-time elections, the Muslim Brotherhood will rise. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time. I always ask 2 final questions. One is, name a book that inspired or influenced you, that you have read in the last 10 years. You just mentioned Nietzsche, Ecce Homo. But maybe there is another book that, in your perspective, in your opinion, explain the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that you read and said, wow. The case for Israel?
No, I wouldn't say any one book on the conflict. The book that made the most impression on me in the last 10 years was Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, which I'd put off reading for a long time, partly because it's 900 pages long, but it's really worth it. It goes through the dark heart of the 20th century, from Stalingrad to Auschwitz and back. And Vasily Grossman, obviously one of the greatest writers of all time, and thank goodness they didn't manage to destroy his manuscript. We have it to read.
Okay.
And we have also your books, which all of them are fantastic. And there is any new book coming?
I couldn't tell you that. I'd have to kill you.
Okay. And one very last tiny bit question. My YouTube channel was about productivity in the early beginnings, and you are extremely productive, man. And let me take my shot. Do you have any productivity advice that you stick to, or you say, this truly helped me throughout my career?
Well, I mentioned recently in a column that a friend of mine in America said that he'd recently been given a drug by his doctor to deal with his irritability. And I said, oh yeah, we talked about it. And he said it helped him somewhat in the workplace. And he said, do you want to try it? I said, absolutely not. I don't want to try an anti-irritability drug. I'd be out of work within a week. I don't know. I'm just very driven. I work very hard and pretty much all the time, but that's because that's what I love.
Do you have like a reading ritual when you read a book? Do you summarize?
Yeah, I have a terrible habit. Even when I'm reading for pleasure, I'm sort of always got my eye out for material.
And do you summarize?
No, I don't. I just highlight wildly. And in really good books, my copies are just lines down the side of every page. It can't be stressed enough that, as you know, but as anyone young who's watching should know, is that when you're starting out, whatever your gifts that you have, you still have to work really hard. And at a certain point, if you work really hard, you can get there, but you have to pedal like hell when you're starting off, and you should. And you shouldn't think the world owes you, because as a writer, I can tell you that there are plenty of writers who think the world owes them a living, and they discover quite swiftly that it doesn't.
So let me just quote Milton Friedman, the late Milton Friedman: no one deserves anything. Thanks God we don't get what we deserve.
Quite.
Thank you so much, Douglas Murray.
A great pleasure.